All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai, Perik Beis, Halacha Aleph, and we will be starting today also Halacha Beis. We're learning Daf Yud Ches. We left off Mamish on top of the Amid, Daf Chai Amid Aleph on the top. The Gemara is going to begin by speaking about more regions that are outside Eretz Yisrael. We're going to have two actual Shilas and Shuvah cases, in other words, stories in which something happened and the Shilah was asked with new legal constellations. We're going to have a machloikas in the Gemara, whether if you have a transporter who is bringing produce, let's say from his home location to the current location, whether the presumption is it came from his home location, whether the presumption is it came from the Ma'amadoi local location. Obviously, there are more nuance to that, as we will see inside the Gemara. And on that Yud Ches Amid Beis, we're going to begin with Halacha Beis. Halacha Beis, the second Mishnah in this Perek, will describe the standards of behavior that a person who is currently an Ama'aretz must be mekabel upon himself. We'll just speak out that Rambam says in front of two Eidim that are Chavedim. And by making such a commitment of upgrading one's own behavior, you through that hachlata, we call it, the Mishnah uses the words Kabbalah, you acquire, you will be considered going forward as a chaver. In other words, we're going to learn in the Mishnah how a person goes from being an Ama'aretz to a chaver. One of the hachlatas that you have to make is not to eat in the home of an Ama'aretz. And the question will be, what happens if a Ama'aretz subsequently invites you, someone who's your friend? What will be the din if you go there? Do you lose your newly acquired chaver status or not? That will be subject to a machlekes in the Mishnah, machlekes Tanoim, between Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. So really, we're going to be learning some laws of proper behavior. And on one hand, obviously, how to uphold one's standards. On the other hand, how not to lose friendships. We're going to have actually in the Gemara machlokes between Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yossi in the understanding of the Shita of the Tana Rabbi Yehuda that holds that if such a person goes to the house of a Am Ha'aretz, he will not lose his chaver status, and we'll see whether that means Rabbi Yehuda holds that even if he ate there, still people are chavedim, people go over, even if there was a lapse of that higher standard, it doesn't matter. We don't say, this person will never, the guy is no longer a chaver, or do we understand, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that his going there doesn't mean he ate something untithed. Could be that he tithed produce over there. And as we'll get more details as we learn all of this inside, Amid Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid, the Gemara begins by quoting a Braisa. And again, we are behemshach to the sugya of different regions in Eretz Yisrael that don't have the halachic status, they don't have the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, which means produce that grows there is exempt from maasros. That means that generally speaking, you're not bound by the kedusha of Shemitah, by the restrictions that you have on the Shemitah. Continues the Braisa, Elu ayare shehem mutarais in betchum Navoi, in the region of Navoi. And here either it's Tzur, which we had yesterday, or Tzir. Let's go actually better with Tzir, because what we learned yesterday was Tzur, or regions around Tzur, were established by Oile Bavel, Utziyar, Ugashmai. Sounds like a place that's very Gashmiistic, nice. Vizivyon, Viyagdi, Chatos. Interesting, a sinful, but it's with a samach. Udvav, Charvesiyah, Ucharacha, Devar, Hizrog. In other words, all of these cities are considered not to be a part of Eretz Yisrael proper, even though obviously they were either in the territory of Eretz Yisrael or adjacent to it. And here we're going to have two scenarios, like we mentioned before, like a Shaila and Shuva. A story happened and a psak din was given and it has to be analyzed. Says the Gemara that Chad Te'in, the Tzemukin, all Litiverium. There was once a Te'in, whether it's a wagon load or a camel load, of tzimukin, of raisins that were imported into Tiberia. And the question is, they did not know how to ascertain where it came from. Tiberia, Iraq Kodesh, certainly, that's part of Eretz Yisrael. Sho'al Gamliel, just lahoir, how these names are written, are spelled. Zuga, Rabbi Bar Kahana. And what was the question? Whether it's a Shemitah produce or not. This happened in the Shemitah year. And really the same thing will be whether it has to be tithed or not. They go hand in hand. Generally, Amalei, Rabbi answered, Ein kol Eretz Yisrael oisa masui echad shel tzemukim. Of course, it did not come from Eretz Yisrael proper, because the words that he used, Rabbi used words that the entire Eretz Yisrael cannot even produce one such load. So if it's such a bundle, such a large loads of raisins, it must be, or circumstantial evidence, that it came from outside Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara right away challenges his answer. The Ein Kol Eretz Yisrael. What are you talking about? Eretz Yisrael is blessed with a riboy of grapes. Right? It's one of the Shivas Haminim. So the Gemara clarifies, well, indeed, there are many grapes. Eretz Yisrael could produce many of such loads of raisins, but it didn't. In other words, Ella Kain Amalei, that Ein Makaim be'Eretz Yisrael oisa masui echad shel tzemukim. That means that the people that grew grapes in Eretz Yisrael, the ruba were used for wine. Those who didn't make wine would sell them as fresh grapes. The culture of Eretz Yisrael was not to make raisins. Now, every now and then, a little bit here, a little bit there, you could, in Yiddish, kratz, gather somehow raisins. But since this person transported one large load of raisins, and the reality is that such a load was never produced in Eretz Yisrael in one location. So here is the logic of the answer. If you have to, so to say, assume when a person transported a product, let's use the law of least resistance. People normally, if they could, they work less. They don't look to work more. It's logical to say that if you were, let's say he had a ton of raisins. In Eretz Yisrael, no manufacturer, in other words, no farmer would produce a ton of raisins. You can gather a ton of raisins, but you're going to have to go to location A, location B, location C, location D. Why would a person do that if they can go to outside Eretz Yisrael? They're not going to travel farther, same 50 kilometers from Tiberia, here or there. And outside Eretz Yisrael, they would produce this amount of raisins in one location. So that's a new svara. It makes, if you don't know, and the person who's selling it to you is someone who halachically you cannot trust, it makes more sense that he got it from one location, which would then mean it was outside Eretz Yisrael, versus to say that he got it from Eretz Yisrael, which would have demanded a lot of work on behalf of this wholesaler. Gavaldik. That was his answer. And it's amazing. And because of that, you b'chlal don't have to separate the maises. Or because of that, this product is b'chlal not bound b'kedusha shmita. Okay. You can buy it, you can sell it, it's not bound by a biur, etc. Another story, another case, actual event. Chad Banash, the Gemara says there was a person that he brought Chada Ashpela, a basket that was filled with kafloitin, with leeks. He brought it to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Tavlai. This happened on the Shemitah year. He wanted to know whether did this come from Eretz Yisrael or not. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Tavlai, who did not know the answer, went himself to ask it to Rabbi Yechanan, right? Maybe it came from Eretz Yisrael. And look at this story, Mamush Gaval. So Amalei, so Rabbi Yechanan says that, listen, I don't know the answer, but Puk Sha'ala Hananya ben Shmuel, go ask Hananya ben Shmuel what was unique about him. Rabbi Yechanan was the great Rav, but he was this nice. He was those unique people that had in his memory all of the braises, right? As we have in the Babli, also these scenarios of Amirayim, but they know all of the Torah Shebal Peh by heart. Maybe there is a braisa, Tosefta, some part of Torah that Rabbi Yechanan wasn't recalling at that moment. Mishnais, everyone knew. Braisas, not everyone needed to know, not everyone had access to. Maybe there's something about leaks. So Nafakushalei, okay. So Yitzchak bat Tavlai, he went to Rabbi Yochanan, who told him now to go to Hananya ben Shmuel. And what's amazing is that Hananya ben Shmuel responded by quoting something ultimately from Rabbi Yochanan. Amalei, listen, Masnisa lo yachmali. I never saw a Mishnah or a Braisa that's speaking about such a case. But Shmuel Amali. But I heard a oral tradition. The Amar Rabbi Yasa b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. How great is that? When a Rav is looking for an answer and he asks someone else, and that other person quotes someone in his name. So Rabbi Yasa said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's subject to machlokes tanoim. That is Falgun, who Rabbi and Abba Lazar ben Rab Shimon. Wow. Now initially we don't remember which one said what. In other words, when the Gemara is quoting Hananya ben Shmuel, what he remembered was one of the two say Mikoimai. Mikoimai means that if something came here. And you have to know that there's nuance that the Gemara is going to add. I'm sure there are many different types of wholesalers. There are different types of transporters. I think he was a trucker. In other words, he brought these leeks to Tiberia. You want to know whether it was bought in the local region, that's called ma'amadoi, whether it came from where the trucker comes from, that's called mikaimai. One of them say that the presumption is mikaimai. The other one says ma'amadoi. Now ma'amadoi, chevra, is that it's Yisrael. It sounds like the origin of the trucker, of the transporter, was outside Eretz Yisrael. So basically, machloikis. Okay. Now, Rabbi actually, when he heard about the statement that Hananya ben Shmuel had from a Messiah, he remembered another nuance. He remembered which Tana says what. Rabbi was Mefarish. Rabbi was the one that says Mekaimai, and Abba Lazar ben Rab Shimon is the one that says Ma'amadai. I just want to add something that as a rule, there are exceptions, but as a rule, when you have a quote, two Tanoim, in our case, Rabbi was quoted before Rabbi Lazar ben Rab Shimon. And then you say Chad Amar, normally Rishon, Achren, which fits, but he wasn't certain. Rabbi authenticated it. That the Rebbe is the one that says Mekoyme means you assume it came from the original location. And Rabbi Lazar ben Rab Shimon that says Ma'amodi Tiveria Eretz Yisrael. The case was Shemitah. Let's say like this, that we learned the last few shiurim midrabanan, grains, legumes, and vegetables that grew on their own on the Shemitah year are completely usher to be consumed. Let's go with that. So where is it tzvichen, not tzvichen, machloikes? Now the Gemara wants to add two qualifications to this machloikes, because you see it's not enough. What do you mean? Why would you assume it came from the origin? Why would you assume it came from over here? So let's add, once you hear these qualifications, there's a logic behind these statements. First of all, says the Gemara, qualification, let's call this number one, that hadad, the temad, what are we talking about? Where is there even shaykh to be a machlokes be'ilen af shalasa when we're speaking about baskets in contrast to cameloads? In other words, the quantities are not humongous. You can get them easily locally. Why would a person schlep? Doesn't matter. He's in the business of transporting. So he transported it from a mile away. Baram, however, says the Gemara, be'ilen til unaya, once you have large pallets, let's call that in today's verbiage, once you have large quantities, kol ama moidai, then everyone would agree. Again, this is like, you can call this circumstantial evidence, but that's what we're using. We're using assumptions that achar mekaimai. If someone is a transporter and he brings this large amount, in this case of leeks, why you wouldn't use such a 40-foot truck? You wouldn't use it for something that you buy locally. That's one way of wording the qualification. And now the Gemara gives another qualification. That hoya mekaimai uma'amadoi heten, if both the place where the transporter comes from and the location where he unloaded the merchandise, right? The origin mekaimai, local ma'amadoi. If both of them are outside Eretz Yisrael, and the question only would have been that even whether or he went through the territory that's Eretz Yisrael. Do we ever have to be chayish that this person stopped on the way and loaded up with merchandise that's on the way? It's always possible, but no one says that halachically we have to take that into account. That if the Mekoyme and the Mamadi were both heted, in our context, it's outside Eretz Yisrael, not bound by the Rabbanan Isur on Sfichim. And let's go with the Girsa Ve'e'aviroi Derech Isur, even though that it was transported through a location, Isur here would mean that is proper Eretz Yisrael. That no one will hold, we take that into account. Okay. But coming back to the case, to the actual Shaila, it met both qualifications. That's why the Gemara began with a basket of, not a camel load of. So basically, what's the halacha? So he says it's a machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. So now, before we go on to B'Poel Mamash, what do we do? Says the Gemara that Rabbi Bar Koyen, boy Komer Rabbi Yosi, that what? Well, we're going to see in a moment that I'm sorry, I skipped a line before. Rabbi says Mekoyme, I skipped before Rabbi Bo, and Rabbi Yochanan paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. Especially we clarified who said what, but then when the bottom line is, I'm just going back a couple of lines, is that Rabbi Yochanan paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, and that was the problem the Gemara has over here. As a klal, that whenever you have a machlokes Rebbe v'chavei roi, now the girsa here is extremely important. We had the sugya also in the Babli. There are certain klali hashas as to how you come to the halach. Rebbe v'chavei roi in singular, not v'chavei rov, which is in the plural. Rebbe and any other Tana, Rabbi Yochanan says that then the rule is you're paskin like Rebbe. And if you're going to tell me there is such a klal, Rebbe v'chavei rov, Rabbi Yochanan says you're paskin like Rebbe, maybe Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, right, the whole Gemara in Bava Metzia Daf Pei Daled, maybe he was considered exceptional. Maybe if it's Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, then you do have the option of paskening like Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. It's not true, because for Amar Rabbi Yoina, that this klal that Rabbi Yochanan taught us, Rebbe and anyone, includes Vafilo Rabbi Elazar Eitz and Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. Look inside the Marafulda, 6 lines before the bottom. The Godel B'doyre Hoya Kedis Rav Metzia, and nevertheless Rabbi Yochanan says Rebbe v'chavei roi is halacha kerebbe. So listen, there can be exceptions. We'll see. There'll be an exception over here. But now that Rabbi Bo made it clear that Rebbe was the one that said Mekoyme, Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, it was the one that said Ma'amadoi, and comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he paskin Ma'amadoi, which means he paskind lechumra. Why would he do that? Actually, I take it back. The case was, what was the case? That not Teveri. I'm confusing with the first case. Actually, it came from a place that is Yisrael. It was sold in Chutz La'aretz. Rabbi Yochanan paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon that you go after the current location, even Lakula. And the question is, Rebbe v'chavei roi. Answers the Gemara, Amalei ma'at boyim Rabbi Yochanan. What are you asking on? Rabbi Yochanan kida'atei. Rabbi Yochanan in this case himself holds like Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. Why is that? Because Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kal Heikelu b'Shviya Sheim Devrayim. That's since Shemitah, the observance of Shemitah. As we quoted from Gittin, Babli, Daf Lamed Vav, that there is a link between Shemitah and Yovel. And for Yovel to be into effect, you have to have Kol Yoshveh Oleh, which, as we mentioned already here in the Yerushalmi, it doesn't mean, it sounds like that every single Jew has to be living in Eretz Yisrael. That would be a stretch. It means that the majority of every tribe has to be living in the specific part of Eretz Yisrael allocated to them under the leadership of Yeshua. And that ended sometimes during Zman Bayis Rishon, which means that since there was no Yovel at all, Shemitah only has to be observed midrabanan. Don't forget, we're speaking about the Isur Svichen, which to begin with is midrabanan. So Rabbi Yochanan has a general rule that when it comes to questions bismanoi of Shemitah, since it's only midrabanan, he's lenient. Now this approach is much broader than the specific case. But what the Gemara wants to say is that, Rabbi v'chavei roi halachi kerebi, but Rabbi Yochanan has his own shita that Shemitah questions, bismanoi, which means bisman hazeh, prior to Shemitah coming back, and prior to Shemitah being on a biblical level, Rabbi Yochanan can be lenient. Furthermore, turning to that Chesed Beis, is the Bayim Meimar, and there are different ways of reading the next line here in the Gemara, but let me just quote a statement that we have a lot in the Bavli, that Rav Tanuhu Upalig, and we're familiar with that line, which means Rav lived in the beginning of the era of the Amoraim. But there are certain times that if Rav needed to, he assumed the madrega of a Tana, and he allowed himself to argue even if no Tana was on that side. Same thing is in the Yerushalmi with Rabbi Yochanan, and they lived at the same time. And this is Gavaldik. I'm trying to myself to remember the Mai that Yud Chesam and base that Rabbi Yochanan is a Talmud, which means the second answer and the first answer really go hand in hand. Yes, Rabbi v'chavei roi. Rabbi Yochanan says halachi kerebi, but not Rabbi v'chavei rav. Not if it's Rabbi against two. Rabbi Yochanan himself was of the opinion of Rav Lazar ben Rav Shimon. Now, Rabbi against two, Rav Lazar ben Rav Shimon himself, then you don't pass him like Rabbi. So it doesn't contradict this klal. Is the Bayim Meimer, let's read it inside, that nitztar fadato shel Rabbi Yochanan in Rav Lazar ben Rav Shimon, that he considered his opinion, and it doesn't, it could be because it's a svichen midrabanan. We're just going back to the klal. That Rabbi Yochanan himself in this case felt that you go after ma'amadoi. The case here is that this was sold outside a halachic Eretz Yisrael. So now v'rabu al Rabbi. V'rabu al Rabbi means it's a roid. It's not Rabbi v'chavei roid. Rabbi and any other Tana. It's Rabbi against more than one. Rabbi and the plural. Against the plural, Rabbi Yochanan always held that if it's more than one against Rabbi, then we're not bound to paskin like Rabbi.
That's not always.
That's always. In other words, the Rabbi Yochanan in the Yerushalmi, like we have Rav in the Bavli, is a Tana Upalig. Now, Rabbi Yochanan himself would not argue with Rabbi, because even though he held Ma'amadoi, he held that way, it's him against Rabbi. He can be like a Tana, but he would bind himself to his other rule, Rabbi v'chaveiroi, even if he's a Chaver. But now that he had Rav Lazar ben Rav Shimon, so now he can be mitzdaref with him. Yeah.
What happens if you had a different case where the Kaimai was going to be more lenient, right? Meaning that according to the first,
to be Mahmud is easier.
We're saying that Rabbi Yochanan holds that because it's Rabbanan, we're making right?
Meaning that
does he really hold like
he holds
or just in this case?
Rabbi Lazar holds Rav Shimon B'chlal. You go after Mamadei. Now to hold Mamadei lechumra isn't so problematic, even if it goes against the Rebbe. You can always be Mahmud. They were surprised that Rabbi Yochanan is paskening lekula against Rebbe. For sure, if it's the other way around, it's no big deal. It's really no big deal to be Mahmud. To be Mekel, how can you go against Rebbe?
I'm saying if the whole rationale is that he always, because it's the Rabbanan, we're Mekel, so therefore
that's the first answer.
But I'm saying according to the first answer, I'm just saying like a chiluk between the answers. Would you say that according to the first answer that he would hold like Rebbe in a case where it was Mekel the other way around?
I got it. Okay. So Danny is saying very good. He's saying the nafkamina between these two answers, because the Gemara says, "Is the boy?" What's the nafkamina would be that what would happen if following the mekoymai would lead to a kula. Right. So according to the first answer, Rabbi Yochanan is always lenient in Shemitah. That's very good. According to the second answer, it's not that way. It's not that way. That he also
answer, he's not really holding like a
very good. Very good. It's being made very good. Okay. I want you to know that in our this is a social in Lubavitch and Chabad Bayuns, when a person undertakes to upgrade one's behavior, we call that a hachlata toiva. We use the word a hachlata. I don't know if you heard by other people from other communities, they use the words Kabbalah. And just to know that word comes here from a Mishnah over here. And I don't know if this is the only Mishnah, but I'm sure it's very unusual. So we keep on learning about the Amoritz and the Chaver. And now this Mishnah will finally address how does one go from being an Amoritz to a Chaver. And what's beautiful, that it's not about one's behavior. It's if a person, the Rebbe would say, Berabin, technically here, we're going to use the words, he has to make a Kabbalah, the Rambam says, in front of two Eidim that are Chavedim. Which will be, you have to make a Hachlata Toiva Berabin. Okay, the way we would word it. That if a person resolves and he verbalizes his resolve to, when it comes to Maisvis, we'll see he has to go through every single detail. But basically what he's saying is that he's no longer going to buy produce from the Amoritz and eat it. That if that were to happen, whether he's eating it, whether he's reselling it, he will always separate the mind. He will not eat in the home of an Amoritz. That's already another challenge. It's not only about kashrus, but it's about when people invite you and you don't go there. We're going to have a lot about this today and God willing tomorrow. That has to be your initial Kabbalah, Achlata. Making that Kabbalah renders you into a Chaver. And then the question in the Mishnah will be, what happens if after you made that Kabbalah, you accepted an invite from your friend the Amoritz? Let's go read the Mishnah inside. Hamakabel olav. I know the Mishnah doesn't say in front of two Eidim, but so understands and paskins the Rambam. Hamakabel olav. If a person takes upon oneself, you didn't do anything yet, but you made such a resolution to be an on. What exactly do you have to be makabel? You have to specify more details, and the Mishnah enumerates that you're saying, ma'aser eshu oichel. The person is saying, I take upon myself that whatever I will eat, unless I got it from a chaver, I'm no longer going to trust the seller, even though he's claiming he separated everything. I won't do that. I'm going to be ma'aser. Now, of course, you're going to be ma'aser only that which the Mai demands you to be ma'aser. Right? Trumas meiser and meiser sheni. But that's what you say you're going to do. Then you have to specify. The eshu moichen and produce that I'm going to sell. The eshu lekeyach and produce that I'm going to buy. The only problem is that isn't that already included with eshu oichel? And the Gemara is going to explain, no, there's one scenario. And we'll see. And here comes the one that we're going to have a more detailed machloikis. That the person says, I will not eat in the home of Amoritz. Now, one thing is clear, when he makes this hachlata, this Kabbalah, it doesn't mean that he's saying he won't go there. That's not what he's saying. You can go there. What he's saying is that I won't eat there. Big difference. That is what you have to say. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda. And as we'll see, let's see how far we get today. And clearly we'll see this on that few tests. Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Chachamim that has to be part of the Kabbalah. That I won't be misareach, I won't eat in the home of an Amoritz. The question now is, what happens if after you made the Kabbalah, and because of it, you went from the status of Amoritz, you went into the status of a Chaver, you actually went to the home of the Amoritz.
Rabbi, is this almost like taking an oath publicly or taking a vow?
Mamish, gavaldik, but don't use the word oath or a vow. That's why I'm saying, Kevin, we have this concept, like the Rebbe said, when he encouraged us to celebrate our birthdays. Part of it is having a fabrengen. Part of that is making a hachlata berabim about a new minute toiv, some upgrade in your Yiddishkeit that you're going to do. That's mamish what it is. The chiddush here is that it's not like we have to have people that testify that person actually is living up to their public Kabbalah. No, the Kabbalah in itself changes the status. Now again, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, as the Rashi earlier points out, it's really what we're going to have on that few tests, is that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Hachamim, he has to make that Kabbalah. What happens after he made that Kabbalah if he accepted an invite? And let me just add another layer. We don't know what happened there because we mentioned that the Hachlata is not that he won't even be a guest. The Hachlata is that he won't eat there. The reality is that when you go over, when someone invites you for a meal and you go over there, not so easy to go there and not to eat. right? We know there's a miftzayim, what happens? You go to people's homes. It's a delicate topic. You have to tell them lachatchila. I'm going there. I have a higher standard of kashrus. You have to know how to word it, right? It's not so simple. It's shaykh. People know how to do it, but you have to know how to do it. To go to someone's home and not to eat there and actually to encourage them to kasher their homes. There's a way of doing that. But here we're not talking about a home that's not kosher. Not kosher. We're speaking about an amaretz. We're speaking about eating produce. That person is not nechshad that the meat won't be good meat. Not nechshad that the milk won't be good meat. We're not worried about the pasakum. We're not worried about paspalter. We're not worried about bisholakum. We're worried about maistis. Now, we're also worried about tadas, but it's not relevant because if it's chulin, you may eat chulin betuma. So Rabbi Huda Omer, here is the key. Even if you, after you made your Kabbalah, you actually went there, you remain a Neman. Now, what's the logic behind Rabbi Yehuda? That will be the machlekes. We will certainly begin today between Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosef. Amrullah Chachamim told Rabbi Yehuda can't be that once a person accepted such an invitation, then al atzmoyein neman, he loses his nemanus. He goes back to his status of Ha'amaretz. And once he goes back to the status of Ha'amaretz, how can you buy produce from him? Don't forget, guys, the difference between whether someone is a chaver or a ma'aretz, we're not labeling people stam to label them. Question is, what's the goal? Can I buy produce from that person without having to tie the demai? Only if that person is a chaver. But the moment a person accepts an invitation from a ma'aretz, say the chachamim, he goes back to his status of a ma'aretz, you can no longer trust him. Obviously, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and we'll see more in the Gemara. Now, before we get to the machlekes chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, like we mentioned, he has to be mafaret in his Kabbalah, in his achlata, three things, four things really. Before the going out to eat as a guest, that which I will eat, it means if I buy it from an amaretz, I will remove the mai, the eshehu moicher, the eshehu loikeach, and then misoreach. Okay, so the eshehu loikeach. Hold on. What are you talking about? If you're buying it to eat it, you already made the Kabbalah, right? And if it's about selling it, really, you made the hachlata that you're not going to sell anything that originated from the Amaretz without first separating the Demai separations. So what exactly is that new detail needed for Ella Eshul Lekeach Amanas Limkot? You're buying it to sell it. Okay, the Gemara, there can be here again. Ella must be Eshul Lekeach Almanas Limkor. You're telling me that we already have that in the Hachlata not to sell it? No. When he says that I take upon myself not to sell produce, right, prior to separating all of the Trumas Umaisres, that refers to produce that he himself was growing. When he made the Kabbalah using the words Eshehu Moicher, that was in reference mi Peres Mich Nasai. That's the first thing he has to say, that I'm not going to eat without separating all the Trumas Umaisres. If I grow something, I'm going to separate all the Trumas Umaisres. And then he says, that which I buy, even though the seller is telling me that it was all separated, if he doesn't have the narrow status of a chaver, I will separate the mai again prior to selling it. So that really covers all of the scenarios. And then the one that we're going to dive into and that we're going to continue tomorrow will be about being a guest. And indeed, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that even if he accepts an invitation and he goes to the home of Amaretz, he doesn't lose his nemanus. Meaning, and again, we're not speaking about, I want to go to the Tanakama. If someone is known already, established already as a chaver, them accepting an invite will not make them lose their nemanus, because we will presume that they didn't eat or that they were toirim u'ma'aser. In other words, they separated themselves in the home. They separated the two separations, and they were machalal on money. But here we're speaking about someone that up until now he was a Amaretz. He made the hachlat. He's making a Kabbalah. He just upgraded his status. For how long? I don't know. No one saw his actual behavior. What we did see is that after he made the Kabbalah, he goes to the house of Ha'aretz. Here, the Chachamim say he loses it. Rabbi Yehuda says he doesn't. So now let's understand. Tani, we learned in a Braisa. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, this is the same Rabbi Yehuda. Mimeyem shel balabatim, which means that all of the balabatim that made the Kabbalah that the Mishnah is speaking about, I know that's the way it works. That even after a person takes upon oneself to behave like a chaver, nevertheless, it's a play on words. The word chaver does not mean a chaver. Chavereya means they're friends. In other words, we take into account the importance of continuing to promote avas reim, the virtue of not separating yourselves from your chaverim because you're becoming more observant. So Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, that's the way it always worked. People go from being a ma'aretz to a chaver, and it never stopped them from being misoreyach by their old chaverim, even though the old chaverim are still in the status of the amaratzim. Afal pikein, even though they actually go there. Rabbi Yehuda is just saying that's the way it is. I'm saying the way it always used to be. They never went back to being an Amaretz. We viewed their produce that are misukanim, the ones that they have betoich, but they koloimer. Look inside the Pnei Moshe, middle of the medium-sized lines, right? Three lines before the end of the medium-sized lines. That even though they still went to be guests amongst their friends that are not nemanim al hamaiser, that in itself did not demote their newly acquired status. These words. In other words, when they went there, we're not saying that they didn't. That's the way Pnei Moshe is saying. It's really a machloikis in a moment. We're going to get that. In other words, what are we saying? How do we interpret it? Pnei Moshe is saying right now, what we're saying is that they went there, and still hey, they were masakin the paytas. They were masakin in that person's home.
So we're not saying they're not like an alcoholic who goes back to a bar.
So 1 second, I don't know why the Pnei Moshe says it over here, because really what he got. Let's wait a moment. Let's just read another. Here's the machlokes that we'll have to remember for today and for tomorrow. So Amar Rabbi Yoina. Rabbi Yoina interprets what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, that chaveram einam chashudim loy lechoil v'loy lahachil. This is very important. In other words, but that's what the Pnei Moshe just said. That let's go like this: social obligations, and social obligations. Don't use the word obligation as a chiyuv. That's a virtue that we have. Demands that even though this person upgraded his observance, it's important for him not to lose the chaverschaft that he has with Amaratze. So him accepting the invitation is something 100% okay. What we are relying on is that he will do something that's uncomfortable. You know what's uncomfortable? For me to go to your home, and I know I can try to do it not in your face, but it might be in your face, and I will separate the Trumas U'Maisres in front of you, my host. Unless you know otherwise, that's the presumption, which is why you don't lose the Namanos. That is the way Rabbi Yoina understands the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. However, Oymar, Rabbi Yosi, everything, okay. That what? No. Chaverim chashudim lechoil. The enam chashudim lahachel. A whole new understanding. That we are not saying that this person who eats out, that's a good expression, is going to be 100% with his upgraded new Kabbalah while he's eating out. What we are saying is that we understand the social importance of people accepting invitations from those who they always ate with. We even can justify, we can understand that while they're eating in someone else's home, it was very uncomfortable for them not to eat. It was very uncomfortable for them to be mafresh, the Trumas Meiser and the Meiser Sheni. So even if they didn't do it, they said to themselves, come on, he's my friend. Don't forget, we're speaking about people, the Amaratzim, they were observant. They were lax by Maisris, by some of them, we're saying. And Roiv were Ma'as in everything. So a person can be moida heter to themselves to promote Avas Reim, a lead in their home. Just because you do that, you're not nechshad that when you are outside their home, that you're going to have a lower standard. That's the Chiddush. That's the way Rabbi Yossi understands Rabbi Yehuda. See, that's Kabbalah.
Years ago, we learned from a Rav that gave us a shir on Pesach. And he says, Chumras are great on Pesach. He says, but there's a mitzvah called Shalom Bayis.
And Abbas Reim.
Of Abbas Yisrael. And he goes, people forget about those mitzvahs which are, I think he said that they were, Dairaisa, for the Chumras or whatever. Maybe it's
what you have in Shulchan Aruch proper is concerning pas palpin. It's mamish what you're saying, that there were certain people that had a minig that during Aseret Yemei Tshuva, they would not eat pas palpin, and they would eat them the rest of the year in Shulchan Aruch, not to lose that social connection. Rabbi Yossi is saying something about. Rabbi Yossi is saying a big chiddush b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yoina, if you witness this person, this newly upgraded chaver person, who went to the house of the Amaretz and he nibbled on the guy's grapes, that's it. He's done. He lost his chaver status. Rabbi Yossi is saying, no, that's not what Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is actually accepting, justifying a person having a lower standard, even though he's going against Takonas Yechon and Kohen Gadol. We're not minimizing, God forbid. But that doesn't mean that if he does that, he'll eat in his own home. It certainly doesn't mean that he's going to sell to other people produce that's not properly tied and claiming that it was all done.
It sounds to me that there's really three explanations here.
There's only two. What's the third?
Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought one is that when he's in that guy's house, you can trust that the food that he's giving him has been fixed.
No.
It's not.
No.
If there was any, let's say he's an artist that wouldn't normally separate these maestros, but for my friend that's a chaver.
No one is focusing on that. We're not focusing on that at all. And Amaretz does not have such namanis. And Amaretz does not have that namanis. That's a good rule. If a person doesn't care for themselves, they won't care for other people. Then he's saying something else. Then he's speaking about, let's say, a person, Nebach eats chalav stam. But then they know that their friend only eats chalav Yisrael. Right. That's not, we're not talking about that. No, l'chayra, they have no nemanos, because that's not important for them. Here we're only speaking about the newly acquired. This is important. The Rashi Dilio says this, and we'll see this, God willing, tomorrow. It's getting late. So we're speaking about someone that used to be an Amaretz. He made a Kabbalah, he made a resolution, and now because of the Kabbalah in front of two Eidim, he becomes a Chaver.
One shot was that he does it himself.
He does it himself.
He's sitting with the plate.
That's exactly what that's what Rabbi Yoina is saying. Exactly. And then Rabbi Yossi is saying that even if we know that he doesn't do it himself, he doesn't lose his newly acquired status.
This is from the Rosh Hashanah. It says,
generally
he eats the food because he knows that the host will tie the produce before serving it out of personal friendliness to him.
Okay, then he found it.
That's explained by the Rosh Hashanah. So that's what I was saying before.
Okay, I take it back. So you have the Shitas Rabbi Yoina, two understandings. Either the understanding is just because he ate there doesn't mean he didn't remove it. He did, unless you know otherwise. Or even more, that we are presuming Rabbi Yoina is saying that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the host will take it off for him because it's his friend. And he made a Kabbalah with Rabbi.
He didn't, but he could eat it anyhow.
It means that he doesn't lose his namanis. Now, hold on. The Gemara is saying that our Mishnah, the Gemara is not going to have a comeback to this. Masnisa pligal Rabbi Yossi. It's mashma from our Mishnah like Rabbi Yoina and not like Rabbi Yossi. I know we're going to end in the middle. It's already 7 o'clock. I just want you to know that at the beginning of Daf Yutes, the Gemara is going to bring other works of Tanoim that will back up Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is not going to be refuted, but our Mishnah did not understand Rabbi Yossi. Our Mishnah understands Rabbi Yoina. Why is that? Because the words our Mishnah quoted, the Chachamim's comeback to Rabbi Yehuda. Amrullah, the Chachamim told Rabbi Yehuda, Al-Atzmai and Neman. In other words, we understand that Rabbi Yehuda accepts this foundational logic of the Chachamim, that if one eats the mai, he cannot be trusted. Elama, in other words, the Chachamim make a statement to which he doesn't respond to because he agrees with them. But Rabbi Yehuda did not retract. Why did he not retract? It's mashma, because the way Rabbi Yoin understands in Rabbi Yehuda, because all Rabbi Yehuda said was just because you got invited to the house of an Amoritz, it doesn't mean that you ate things that are untied in their home. Doesn't mean that. Either because you were ma'ased it, or because we can trust that the Amoritz, your friend, did it for you. That's why he doesn't have to respond to it. In other words, the fact that Rabbi Yehuda did not respond to the Chachamim, they both agree that if you are not Neman, if you eat in the house of Amoritz, you taka lose your Nemanus. According to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't even agree with this premise. He holds that a person can taka not be Neman when they eat in the house of their chaver, of their friend the Amoritz, and they still retain their Nemanus. But that's not mashma from our Mishnah. It doesn't matter. First of all, you can squeeze it in both ways. And secondly, as Daf Yotes, we're going to find that the Gemara is going to begin that Milei and the Rabban and the Sayin al Rabbi Yossi. In other words, we're going to uphold the machlekes between Rabbi Yoin and Rabbi Yossi.